Our water stinks. We live in an area with notoriously bad well water, and we have a pretty extensive 4-stage treatment system to deal with it. So, a quick overview of the system. We have an Aquavar Solo submersible pump controller here. So this is supposed to control your pump to give you a much narrower and more constant range of water pressure, even when there's high demand, as opposed to a more traditional simple controller where you just have some lower limit like 40 psi, so it drains your pressure tank until you get all the way down to that lower limit, kicks back on and charges up. This runs your pump at a more variable speed and keeps you at a much more narrow range for pressure. So the water coming in then goes through a hydrogen peroxide treatment. So hydrogen peroxide is pumped out of this tank and mixed in here. That is supposed to neutralize the sulfur or that lovely fart or rotten egg smell in the water. We then go up here to a sediment filter. So I installed this when we had to get our well pump installed because well pump reinstalled because it died. Digging that up, kicked up a ton of sediment at the bottom of the well. And you can see these are brand new and white when you first install them. And just a couple weeks ago, I think I put this one in. Now it's already got this reddish brown color, which I believe is from iron in the water or who knows what else. We then go over here through a carbon filter, and then finally a water softener because we also have hard water. And the problem we were having with this system was, even though we had this nice pump controller that was always reading 55 or 60 psi when the water was running, we were noticing really low pressure when we would go take a shower and, flush a toilet or run the dishwasher or something at the same time. Even though we had had decent pressure before, and this problem had seemingly gotten worse over time, even though the pressure was reading okay at the beginning of the system. So the problem was that we didn't have any pressure gauges further down the line to figure out where that pressure drop was happening. So what we did was just installed more gauges with these little T-connectors in the PEX tubing going up to a mechanical gauge after each stage of the system. So there's one here after the sediment filter, one here after the carbon filter, and then finally one after the softener, which then goes on to the rest of the house. So since each one of these components also has a bypass valve, I guess with the exception of the hydrogen peroxide, but I can bypass the sediment filter, and then on the back of each of these tanks, there's these two knobs here where you can turn to point these at each other to bypass the tank. What this lets me do is then when water is running, look at the pressure drop across each component, and then bypass an individual component to see if my pressure gets better. So what I'm going to go do now, right now no water is running, so you can see the gauges aren't really moving, and everything through the whole system is pretty constant at right about 55 psi. I'm going to go run a shower and sink at the same time so we can look at what happens with these gauges as water is running. So now I have a lot of water running. Hopefully you can hear me over the clicking. That is the pump here for the hydrogen peroxide running. So I have a shower, a sink running, and I also flushed the toilet for good measure. And what you can see is that, again, this controller keeps the pressure very high, but if we look at each stage of the system, we see I'm getting maybe about a 5 psi drop through the sediment filter here. Not much of a drop at all through the carbon filter, and then a slight drop, so I'm still really good. I'm still up around 50 psi through the whole system. But the problem we were having before, again, before I installed these gauges, we were just seeing really low pressure in the shower. And then after I installed the gauges and came down here and checked, we were getting all the way down to about 30 psi here at the end. And having multiple gauges allowed us to identify the issue that the softener was the problem. So we were seeing a 15 psi drop through just the softener tank. So we had the water treatment company come swap out. They tried taking it apart and cleaning initially and then still had the same issues, so they wound up eventually swapping the tank out. And as you can see now, everything is fine and we're still getting 50 psi. But had we not installed these gauges, we never would have been able to identify that issue because we only knew that the pressure was still high at the beginning, and then somewhere down the line the pressure was dropping, but we didn't know where. So if you have any similar experiences or questions or advice, please go ahead and leave a comment on this video and check out the rest of the channel for other DIY tutorials and tips. Thanks.